broke doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a letter or a phone call. It arrives quietly, the way water finds a crack, and by the time you notice it, it's already everywhere. I was 68 years old, standing in a storage unit in Sacramento that I could no longer afford, looking at the sum total of a life. A recliner, some boxes of dishes, a dresser that used to belong to my mother, and a checking account with $211 in it, 4 days before my next Social Security deposit. I want to be honest with you about that number, because I think people who tell these stories skip the part where it was actually bad. Not tight, not watching the budget. Bad. The kind of bad where you do the math on whether you can afford both the storage unit fee and groceries this month, and the answer is no, and you have to choose. My name is Carol. I spent 31 years as a maintenance supervisor for an apartment management company, fixing other people's broken pipes and busted water heaters so they could go on with their lives while mine quietly came apart in the background. I was married for 19 years. My husband passed when I was 61. My daughter lives in Denver with her own kids and her own bills, and I never wanted to be the thing that made her life harder, so I didn't call as often as I probably should have. By 68, the apartment management company had gone through 2 ownership changes, and somewhere in the second one, my pension, the thing I'd been promised for 3 decades, turned into a fraction of what I'd been told it would be. I won't bore you with the corporate details. I'll just tell you that I retired with $1,180 a month coming in, a storage unit I couldn't sustain, and a friend's couch in Stockton that I understood, without anyone saying it out loud, had an expiration date. That's where this starts. Not with a plane ticket, with a couch, a storage unit bill, and a woman who had spent her whole life being useful to other people and had run out of ways to be useful to herself. I found the Philippines the way a lot of people my age find things now, which is to say, by accident, at an hour when I should have been asleep. My friend's granddaughter had left a tablet on the coffee table, and I was up at 4 in the morning because sleeping had gotten complicated since the couch situation began. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just scrolling to keep my hands busy. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. A video came up of a woman sitting on a porch somewhere green, drinking coffee, talking about her weekly grocery run. She wasn't rich. You could tell by the porch, by the plastic chair, by the way she talked about a fish market like it was a good friend. She said something that stuck with me. She said, "I didn't come here because I had money. I came here because I didn't." I watched that video 3 times. Then I watched everything else that channel had. Then it was almost 7 in the morning and I hadn't slept, and I had 11 tabs open about a small island in the central Philippines called Camotes that I had never heard of and could not have found on a map the day before. I spent the next 6 weeks doing what a maintenance woman does with a problem, which is take it apart piece by piece until you understand exactly what's broken and what it costs to fix. I read about the visa. I read about the ferry schedules. I found a Facebook group for foreigners living on small islands in the Visayas, and I read 2 years of posts before I ever wrote one myself. What I was looking for, specifically, was whether a woman with $1,080 a month and no savings to speak of could actually build something there, or whether it was one more thing that sounded good and wasn't true. What I found over and over from people who had no reason to lie to a stranger on the internet was that the islands were different from the cities. Rent was lower, food was lower, and more than that, there was a kind of life available there that didn't require much capital to start, just labor, patience, and a willingness to be the new person in a small place for a while. I called my daughter in April. I told her what I was thinking. There was a long quiet on the line, the kind where you can hear someone deciding how honest to be. She finally said, "Mom, you don't have any money. How are you going to move somewhere on no money?" I told her the truth, which was that I didn't have enough money to keep living where I was either, so the risk wasn't staying safe versus taking a gamble. The risk was already here. I was just choosing which version of broke I wanted to be. She didn't like that answer, but she also didn't argue with the math, because there wasn't really an argument to have. I sold what I could out of the storage unit, kept a duffel bag and one box I shipped ahead, and I used almost every dollar I had left, plus a little I borrowed against my next 2 Social Security checks from a friend who trusted me more than I trusted myself, to buy a one-way ticket to Cebu, with a ferry connection from there to the island. I landed with $340 to my name. I want to sit on that number for a second because I think it matters. Not $34,000, not a retirement account. $340,000, a duffel bag, and a stubbornness that had gotten me through 31 years of other people's plumbing emergencies and was apparently going to have to get me through this too. The ferry crossing took a little over an hour. I remember standing at the rail watching the mainland shrink behind me and thinking, with total clarity, that I had no idea what I was doing, not a plan beyond the next 2 weeks. Not a contact on the island beyond a name a man in the Facebook group had given me, a guest house owner named Ramil who rented rooms by the week and, according to the group, wouldn't ask too many questions if you paid on time. Ramil met me at the small port with a motorcycle that had a sidecar welded onto it, the kind they use for everything out there, and drove me 40 minutes down a coastal road to a guest house that was really just 4 rooms attached to his family's house. My room had a bed, a fan, and a window that looked out at a coconut tree and, past that, water so clear it looked like it had been filtered. The rent was 2,500 pesos a week, somewhere around $44. I paid for 2 weeks up front, and that left me with a little over $250 to figure out the rest of my life. I didn't sleep well that first night, not from excitement, from arithmetic. I lay there running numbers the way I used to run parts inventories, trying to make $250 and a monthly check of $1,000, $80 stretch into something that resembled a future. The next morning I woke up before the sun out of habit. 30 years of early maintenance calls had trained that into me permanently, and I walked down to the water because I didn't know what else to do with myself. There was a small group of fishermen pulling in a banca boat, hauling nets, and one of them, an older woman about my age mending net alongside the men, noticed me standing there and waved me over, not saying much, just gesturing at the net, like she could use another pair of hands. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. I hadn't done real physical work in years, and my back reminded me of that within about 10 minutes. But I helped anyway, because it was the first time in months I'd felt useful for something other than getting out of someone's way. Her name was Nanay Elsa. She didn't speak much English, and my Cebuano was non-existent. But by the end of that hour we had a rhythm going, and when the catch was sorted she handed me 2 fish. Just handed them over. No discussion. The way you'd hand a tool to someone standing next to you who obviously needed it. I cooked those fish over the little gas burner in my room, and it was, without exaggeration, one of the best meals of my life. Not because of the seasoning, I barely had any, but because I had helped catch it, and because for one morning I had been a woman who was useful again, instead of a woman who was a burden. That became the shape of my days. Up before sunrise, down to the water, helping with nets, learning the rhythm of the tides and the boats. Within 3 weeks, Nanay Elsa and the other fishers had stopped treating me like a curiosity and started treating me like a slow but willing extra hand. I wasn't earning money from it. I was earning something else, which was a place in a routine, and on an island that small, a place in a routine is worth more than you'd think. Here's where I need to give you the numbers, because that's the part of the promise in the title I intend to keep. My room, once I moved from Rommel's weekly guest house rate to a small monthly rental he helped me find, a single room with a shared outdoor kitchen behind a family's house, ran 2,200 pesos a month, about $39. Electricity, since I ran one fan and charged one phone, came to around $6 a month. There's no water bill on that stretch of the island. Most households pump from a shared well, and it's treated as a communal responsibility, not a utility. Food in the beginning was almost entirely what I could trade labor for, or buy at the smallest possible scale at the sari-sari store, the little home front shops that sell rice and instant coffee and canned goods by the piece. A kilo of rice ran about 55 pesos, under $1. Vegetables from the little Wednesday market in the nearest town cost me maybe 150 pesos, under $3, for a week's worth. Some weeks Nene Elsa would send over a plate of something because I'd helped mend a net or hauled water for her garden, and I learned very quickly on that island that money is only one of the currencies people trade in. Altogether, in those first few months, I was living on somewhere between $70 and $90 a month, on a check of $1,180, which meant that for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't doing the math to survive. I was doing the math to save, and the number in the bank, small as it was, started climbing instead of falling for the first time in a decade. I want to be straight with you about the hard parts, too, because anybody who tells you this kind of move is easy is selling you something. The heat in April took real getting used to. There were afternoons I did nothing but lie under the fan and wait for 4 o'clock. The nearest real clinic was a boat ride and a motorcycle away, and that is a genuinely frightening thing to sit with at 68, alone, on an island where you don't yet know how the healthcare system works. My tourist visa required a run to the immigration office on the bigger island every couple of months in the early going, before I sorted out a longer-term arrangement, and that process tested my patience in ways plumbing never had. And there were nights, plenty of them, when the loneliness came in specific and heavy, usually around the time I would have called my late husband to tell him about my day, and there was no one on the other end of that habit anymore. But something started happening around month 4 that I hadn't planned for. A retired contractor from Australia who'd settled on the island heard through Ramil that I used to do maintenance work, and he had a rental cottage with a water pump that hadn't worked right in a year. I fixed it in an afternoon with parts I improvised from the hardware stall in town. He paid me 2,000 pesos, and more importantly, he told 2 other expats. Within 2 months, I had a small, steady trickle of repair work. Ceiling fans, pumps, a generator. The exact skills I'd spent 31 years using to keep other people comfortable, while my own life fell apart. Suddenly worth something real again, on my own terms, at my own pace, for people who said thank you and meant it. By month 8, I was earning an extra $150 to $250 a month doing repair work I chose, when I chose it. Combined with my Social Security, I was living comfortably on the same income that 4 months earlier hadn't been enough to keep a storage unit and a couch situation afloat. I should tell you about the visa and the paperwork, too, because it's the least glamorous part of the story, and the part people ask me about most in the comments on videos like this one. I ended up applying for a special resident retiree visa once I'd been on the island long enough to understand the process wasn't something to be afraid of, just something to be patient with. I hired a small local agency out of Cebu to walk me through the bank deposit requirement and the paperwork, and I'm glad I did, because I would have made a mess of it alone. It took the better part of 4 months and more trips on that ferry than I care to count, but it turned a temporary situation into a permanent one. And there is a specific kind of peace that comes with knowing you're not just visiting your own life anymore. My daughter came to visit at the 10-month mark. She'd been quiet on the phone for most of it, polite, worried in the specific way adult children are worried when they suspect their mother has done something reckless but don't want to say so directly. She landed skeptical. I picked her up at the port on the back of a borrowed motorcycle, which she was not thrilled about, and drove her the coastal road to my little house, which by then had a small garden out front that Nene Elsa had helped me plant. She walked through it slowly. She looked at the fixed shelves, the little repair setup I kept in the side yard, the row of tools I'd bought one at a time as the work came in. That evening, Nene Elsa and half the fishing crew showed up with 2 fish and a bottle of something homemade, because word had traveled that my daughter was visiting, and on that island, that is simply what you do. She sat there eating fish caught that morning, listening to women who barely spoke English tell stories about her mother in broken sentences and big gestures, and at one point she just looked at me and said, "Mom, you have a whole life here." I told her that was the whole point. She said you didn't have anything when you got here. I told her that was also the point. Before she left, she asked me the question I think she'd really flown out to ask, whether I regretted it, whether starting over broke at 68 in a place I'd never heard of a year earlier had been worth what it cost me in comfort and certainty. I told her the truth. I told her that back in Stockton I had money problems and no life. Here, I still had money problems some months, smaller ones, but I had a life wrapped entirely around them. Nene Elsa needed me on the boat some mornings. The Australian's neighbor needed her ceiling fan looked at. The Sari store owner saved me the good mangoes, because I always overpaid on purpose, and she always noticed. I was needed, specifically, by name, in 100 small ways every week, and that had not been true of my life in years. There was a typhoon that came through the second year, a real one, and I won't pretend that wasn't frightening, boarding up windows with plywood I didn't own until Nene Elsa showed up with what she had, riding it out in a cinder block house that shook harder than I wanted it to. But what I remember most isn't the wind. It's the morning after, when half the households on that stretch of coast were out clearing debris together before the sun had fully risen, no one waiting to be asked, no one keeping track of whose tree had fallen on whose fence. I fixed 3 pumps that week for free, because that's what you do when your neighbor's water system fails, and you're the only one on the road who knows how. I'm 70 now. I still live in that same small house. I still go to the water most mornings, though my back has finally, firmly, told me my net hauling days are mostly over, and mostly I just sit with the fishers now, and drink coffee, and let the younger ones do the hauling, while I do repairs for anyone on the island who needs them. I make, most months, somewhere around $1,400 total between the pension and the work, and I spend maybe $500 of it. The rest sits in an account, slowly becoming the first real savings I've had since my 30s. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story. I think about that storage unit sometimes. The recliner, the boxes, the $211. I think about the version of me standing in front of it, certain that the story was mostly over, that whatever was left of my life was going to be a slow negotiation between a small check and a shrinking set of choices. I couldn't have told that woman, standing there doing the math on groceries versus storage fees, that 2 years later she'd be sitting on a porch on an island she'd never heard of, with dirt under her fingernails from a garden she planted, owing her neighbor a fixed water pump, and being owed 2 fish in return, richer in every way that mattered than she had been with 3 times the money and none of the life. If you are watching this with a small check and an even smaller sense of what's still possible for you, I want to tell you plainly, the way I wish someone had told me. Broke is not the end of the story. It's just the part where the story gets rewritten by someone with nothing left to lose and everything left to build. I had $340 and a duffel bag. That turned out to be enough, not because the money stretched, though it did, but because I stopped needing money to be the thing that made my life worth living. A net full of fish and a hand on my shoulder did that instead. I built this life from scratch, at 68, with almost nothing. If I could do it, so can you.